So my father taught me how to respect a weapon. I taught all my kids how to respect a weapon. And it started off
on a picnic table in the backyard. And not only, it started with BB guns, but it taught them how to respect it. And before I would even let them go out with their friends and play with them, I would give them the Marine Corps basic training on that.
And basically it's how to handle a weapon, how to keep it safe, how to make sure it's secure. And even today, I have neighbors that, all of a sudden get a firearm or give them one from a brother or something, but I want to make sure that they're safe with it and take them out into the range or whatever to make sure that they understand the importance of respecting a weapon. So I think this community is very important to keep. So please keep this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 21st District, Representative Peterson.
Thank you, Speaker Timmons. I'd like to start off by thanking the good gentleman for the 17th for his service to this country and all of the veterans that serve in this body on both sides of the aisle. I'm deeply grateful as somebody who has not served in the military. But Speaker Timmons, I'm asking for a no vote on this amendment because while veterans are very adept at the use of firearms, veterans also are much more susceptible to suicide by firearms. As we gavelled out last night, which was about 24 hours ago, it's estimated that 13 veterans in this country took their own lives with a firearm. Veterans are 5 times more likely to use a firearm in suicide than the rest of the population. The underlying bill might give some pause when you're able to purchase a firearm. Maybe take just a little bit of time. If you're in a mental health crisis with suicidal ideations, to just take a little bit of time before you are able to purchase a firearm. So, Speaker Timmons, I think this is a critical piece of the underlying bill and one of the reasons that I will ultimately support it. Because suicide from our veterans is a national tragedy. It's tragedy. And I think this is an opportunity for us to face that fact and for us to do something about it here in the state of Washington. So I'm asking you to reject this amendment as we try to save lives of our veterans and save lives for people in our community. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the concerns about veteran suicide with the good gentleman from the 21st. I also know, as a veteran, that veterans rely on each other when it comes to mental health. This underlying bill is seeking to ensure that people undergo training and show competency and have a cleared background. This is ensuring that the members of our society that are the highest trained in weapons, firearms, ones who have gone through immersion training. The U.S. Army basic training involves 9 weeks of immersion where you're assigned a firearm, an M4 now. It's very similar to the AR-15 rifle, and you take care of it to demonstrate safety throughout. The level of training that our veterans get far exceeds anything that could be added into legislation. And while veteran suicide is a huge concern to all of us, this underlying bill is not going to address the problem. There is other legislative work that we could do that would address that problem and really help fill that gap. I am urging we adopt this to recognize that additional training, a permit to purchase, is not going to fix veteran suicide. So please, I urge you vote with me yes on this amendment.
Further remarks? The good member from the 31st District, Representative Penner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I speak on behalf of my own experience, 8 years in the United States Marine Corps, 15 years working with veterans in Keene County and Pierce County. And what I see in this amendment is a permit process and veterans, and I'm trying to understand the argument that's been made, Mr. Speaker. It seems like the argument that's been made is that if veterans had a permit process, that they wouldn't be committing suicide at the rate that they are. It seems like the argument that's being made is that, maybe if we had a permit process, veterans wouldn't be doing this. Maybe if veterans had some lesser amount of training to qualify for this permit, they wouldn't be going through the levels of suicide. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand the argument that's being made against this amendment. I really don't. Urge a yes on this amendment.
The further remarks, the good member from the 19th District, Representative McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also have served in the United States Marine Corps for 14 years. The training with weapons is intensive. I want to focus on an aspect of the amendment that's going to have an effect for the positive, and that is we want to show competency of weapons handling. Part of that is the demonstration through the showing of a DD-214 form. A DD-214 form is a document, an official document that a veteran carries with them wherever they go after their service. They must have that document with them. It proves their service. And those competencies, those skills that were picked up in basic training and beyond are covered in that document. It shows what you did and what you can do. And I assure you, the underlying bill that wants to have a citizen be trained in these aspects is covered in basic training. Why would we have them do it again when it has already been covered? It only makes sense in terms of documentation that they can prove with a DD-214 that all veterans have and have to have for any kind of benefit that they're going to be taking part in, to be able to show that and say, I have the competency. I am ready to be able to handle a weapon. I can do it. I don't know anybody, Mr. Speaker, who could see this amendment and think that it had anything to do with mitigating the harm that veterans experience or put upon themselves through suicide. Every suicide is a tragedy, no matter who it is. But, Mr. Speaker, show me the trend line or the data that shows that states with more restrictive policies have veterans that are in safer hands. Show me the states or the communities at which these restrictions are in place and veterans are better off. You can't find it, Mr. Speaker, because that's not what makes veterans safe. What makes veterans safe is a community that takes care of them, a family, a brotherhood and sisterhood that looks out for each other. That's what makes the difference for veterans who have served. It isn't policies about how hard it is to actually have the right to be able to bear arms and exercise your constitutional rights. You can't find that trend line. You can't find that correlation. So I'd ask you, Mr. Speaker, please say yes to this common sense as it gets, amendment for this bill.
Further remarks? A good member from the 4th District, Representative Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been 53 years since I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and took my basic training. And the troops were coming home from Vietnam at that time, so I didn't get my chance to serve, which may have been a good thing. But I do think that people who have taken basic training or boot camp or any kind of training like that form a cadre in this country of experienced soldiers and Marines and sailors that we always, if we didn't serve then, we're always ready to serve. I would like to think if our country was suddenly in peril again, I would dust off my musket and assume my role within the ranks of those who were there to defend the country again. So I rise in support of this amendment, and it would be an honor to serve. Even though I'm kind of getting on in years, I think I could still do my part. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 25th District, Representative Keaton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We help other veterans. We help our brothers and sisters in arms when they're undergoing stress by looking at them in the eye. We talk to them. That's how we help people through things, people that have seen things much worse than I've seen. And we help them get through things. Adding a permitting process would do nothing to help the suicide of our veterans. It's a terrible tragedy when it happens, but it's about caring for somebody and talking to them and listening. And that's how we save people. Thank you.
Further remarks? The member from the 35th District, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I served in the U.S. Navy, and for years I carried around almost every day a Mossberg 500 shotgun, an M16, a Beretta M9, and the things that the training I underwent to not only handle and clean and understand every little piece and part and gizmo within that firearm was far more extensive than most members of the public will ever get. And I just simply don't understand, like many of my colleagues, how a permit to purchase will help the devastating amounts of some of the scars, some physical, but mostly some of them are the scars that are the inside for our veterans in the armed forces, my brothers and sisters, many of which have stood up on this floor already tonight. How is a permit to purchase going to help with suicide or suicide ideation or mental health? How is a background check going to help with that? Which, by the way, as I served in the armed forces, most veterans have a secret or higher security clearance and have went through more extensive background checks than most of our citizenry. How is that going to help to watch a training video or to do a live fire exercise, Mr. Speaker, that any veteran here or in the state of Washington has done so many times? I simply don't understand how this bill would help with veterans' mental health or suicide ideation. Those are issues that we should absolutely tackle and solve, but those are mental health and health issues. Those are about listening. Those are about being there for one another. Those are about getting services through our VSOs like we talked about the other day. Veterans have written a blank check up into and including their life for the freedoms and the constitutional rights of everybody in this country, selflessly volunteering for the constitutional rights we now talk about today, including the ones some don't like the Second Amendment. We have a right to keep and bear arms, and the state of Washington has even strengthened in its state constitution those rights. Please vote yes on this amendment, Mr. Speaker, and support veterans who have a ton of training in firearms already.
Further remarks? Representative Defoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you raise your right hand and swear an oath, write a blank check to your country, up to and including your life, like the good gentleman from the 35th said, you do so much more than have a live fire exercise. I can tell you some stories, Mr. Speaker, about the brave women and men in uniform. They had a live fire exercise, Mr. Speaker. They had a live fire exercise. They don't need the state of Washington to certify that they're up to the task of owning a firearm. This bill is disrespectful. The underlying bill is disrespectful to our women and men in uniform. This amendment makes a correction. We need to be grateful to our veterans. We need to respect their service. We need to respect the training that they already had, that they underwent. We need to respect the sacrifices that they've made to our country. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, the 24th Amendment, or Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution, gives the right to carry a firearm to every citizen of the state of Washington. By imposing this restriction, by creating this barrier to owning a firearm, possessing a firearm, we are blocking the constitutional rights of residents of Washington. We take it a step way too far beyond that when we tell our veterans that what they went through is not enough to maintain their privilege, to maintain the honor that they earned and that they deserved. We need to pass this amendment today. We need to pass this amendment right now for the sake of our veterans, for the sake of their service to our country, for the sake of having them be available to protect our families and our communities respectfully, responsibly, just like they did, many of them, when they were overseas, protecting our freedoms, protecting our country, protecting the world. Vote yes.
Further remarks? Good member from the 12th District, Representative Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise and ask for support for this amendment, but I'm also confused against the arguments against that we've been hearing tonight. As a former law enforcement officer, one of the things that was always taught to us was weapon safety. And in that, there were two things that were even more important, and that was not only how to use the weapon safely, but when to use it. If I have a son that's currently a law enforcement officer in the state of Maine, I have two more sons that are in the Army. Currently, one is an Army Ranger, just actually got restationed here, just down the road, JBLM from Georgia. I have another one that's in North Carolina, about halfway through Special Forces training. And it's a grind. I hear their stories. He's currently in the dark as he's going through small unit tactics. They do not take exception to stepping outside of the rules of the gun handling, of the firearms training, of rules of engagement. And that's because they have to keep their partners, the ones that they're working with, safe so they can accomplish the mission that's a task. So we have our freedoms. And the thing that I keep hearing my sons tell me that's so important is, one, we talk about peer. We're learning from our mistakes in the past. And we are moving forward, and I believe we have a lot more to go and to gain to minimize veteran suicide, civilian law enforcement suicide as well. But they are gaining. But these men and women that are serving, they hold their head high in the pride to be able to serve and to do and to set their lives before us, to risk that, not knowing if they get sent on a mission, if they're going to come home, but being willing to do that. But everything that in their training that's passed down from their cadre is preparing them to know what is right and what is wrong when they come back to civilian life. So I would ask you to rise in support of this as well. Thank you.
Further remarks? Good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have one final comment, and that's these veterans who have served our country, who swore this oath to the Constitution to uphold and defend our Constitution, protect our way of life here at home. Just because we've sent them places that may have caused wounds that are not seen does not mean that their constitutional rights are any less than the rest of ours. And what we're saying by not adopting this amendment would be that their constitutional rights and their training, that's not enough. Their training has been negated, their life experience.
Please continue and talk to the policy. You have 35 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By adopting this amendment, you and I, we are telling our veterans that their training and their service was enough, and we respect it. I urge your adoption.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 269. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Division has been called. Speaker is about to start the roll call machine. The Speaker has started the roll call machine. Thank you. Has every member who wishes to vote voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? The Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Will the clerk please take the record?
Mr. Speaker, there are 39 yeas, 51 nays, 1 excused.
Amendment is not adopted. Further amendments. Amendment 262. Clerk, please read.
On page 2, line 10, after 2, insert the requirements to produce a valid
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
Remarks. The good member from the 7th District move the amendment.
Speaker, I move Amendment 262.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 262 be adopted. Remarks. Representative Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have sincere concerns that this bill and policy may be unconstitutional. I believe that this amendment, which would restrict the bill or the policy to the largest, most urban parts of our state, would be an appropriate place to test it, where a larger portion of the people support this type of policy, but also if it's going to go through the courts and potentially be struck down. We have a large problem in our state of polarization, political polarization, and trust. I believe that restricting it to these large, more urban places where gun violence is more prevalent would be a better place to test it. I urge this amendment's adoption.
Further remarks. Good member from the 46th District, Representative Farvar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Asking for a no vote on this amendment. This amendment would create inconsistent standards and be difficult to implement. My community has been asking for clear, uniform standards for public safety, not a patchwork system that is difficult to uphold. Please vote no to create clear, consistent forms of accountability.
Further remarks. Good member from the 35th District, Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please excuse Representative Eslick.
Member is excused. Further remarks. Good member from the 39th District, Representative Walsh. 19th. My apologies, Representative Walsh.
I have to say, Mr. Speaker, the 39th would be very happy. Thank you. Please vote yes on this amendment, Mr. Speaker. You know what? In my part of the state, where we like Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington State Constitution and don't want our right to defend ourselves and the state to be impaired, we have a saying. We have a saying that the 80-20 rule applies. That the best kind of work, the best kind of policy, I would say the best kind of law, Mr. Speaker, focuses on the closest point, the tightest point, the most urgent element of a problem. And that if you want to do good, you need to let the sort of peripheral things fall away and focus on where the problem lies. And if the problem in our public policy is gun violence, let's focus this experiment in extra-constitutional regulation where the problem exists. And the problem exists in a handful of locations where guns are often acquired illegally and used illegally. Let's try this experiment where that problem lies, where the most homicides that are gun-related occur, and maybe this extra-constitutional experiment in regulation, maybe it'll work. Vote yes on the amendment, and let's focus this experiment on where the need is most urgent, where gun violence is the biggest problem, and that is in our most populous counties. Vote yes, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks. Good member from the 20th District, Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, I try to be sensitive to other members and why their voters sent them to this chamber. And I appreciate that the gentlelady's constituents sent her to do certain things regarding firearms. But you know, my constituents sent me here to do certain things with regards to firearms. Some of the initiatives that have passed in the last 7 or 8 years, I think there were a couple of them, that would restrict firearms. The 20th District had the highest no vote of any of the 49 legislative districts on both of those initiatives. My inbox has been filled for years, for decades, saying, do not restrict my firearms rights. Do not restrict my Second Amendment rights. They're law-abiding citizens exercising their state and U.S. constitutional rights. They deserve to be able to exercise those rights. They're law-abiding citizens. They use firearms responsibly. Some of them use firearms to feed their families. Some of them use firearms to protect their families. And they have told me for a couple of decades, do not take away my right to protect my family, my right to feed my family. Do not punish me when I am being a law-abiding citizen by passing more restrictions on my Second Amendment rights. That's what my constituents sent me here to do.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 262. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. No. Amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment 266. Clerk will read.
On page 2, line 10, after 2, insert the requirements.
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
Member from the 7th District, Representative Abel, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 266.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 266 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the underlying bill that we're looking at, in my mind, does a few things. I'd like to talk about what my amendment will do with regard to that bill. The bill, as I understand, proposes a new permit to purchase firearms. It also requires extensive fees and costs associated with that permit to purchase, and requires, among other things, a background check. My amendment would exempt, Amendment 266, would exempt members of the Guard as well as reserves from this requirement. I'd like to talk about the basis and the background for this amendment. So I rise as a proud member of the United States Navy Reserve. I enlisted in the United States Navy Reserves as an enlisted man in spring of 2003 on the grounds of what was then known as Navy Operational Support Center, Spokane. And I have been both a reservist and an active member ever since that time. It's been my pleasure and honor to serve both as an active member of the United States Navy and as a reservist. What I know from my reserve experience, Mr. Speaker, is that it involves the experience of working at your daily 9-to-5 job throughout the work week, and then on the weekend you put on the cloth of your country or your uniform and you report to a duty station. You engage in training, you engage in assuring your military preparedness, your readiness to deploy, and then you go back to your 9-to-5 job then again on Monday. So your work week is not 5 days a week, instead it's a 12-day work week. These members of the Guard and reservists who do this day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, are our neighbors. They are volunteers within our communities. They're patriots who answer the call to fight our country's wars and respond to our natural disasters. Here in the state of Washington, we have roughly 8,000 members of the Washington National Guard, our citizen soldiers, citizen airmen, and roughly 11,000 reservists at the federal level. These individuals are highly trained. They are involved in community and in continuing service in their unit, so they have that sense of camaraderie and ongoing support that differentiates themselves from maybe individuals who are no longer continuing to serve. When I talk to other members of the reserves or the Guard about this proposal, I hear certain things come back to me. A common refrain, Mr. Speaker, and that is that the Guard members that I speak to and the reservists that I speak to know that we already have an existing permit to purchase. It's called the United States Constitution. They swore an oath to it on the day they enlisted or took their oath of office as a United States officer. They also know that this permit to purchase is amply paid for with the blood of patriots from Bunker Hill to Baghdad and Bagram. And finally, Mr. Speaker, they also know that the background check is well passed every time they put on the uniform and report to a drill weekend or an annual training. I ask this amendment be adopted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks? Good member from the 21st District, Representative Peterson.
Thank you again, Speaker Timmons. Asking for a no vote on this amendment, although that I think I appreciate the passion from the good gentleman and again appreciate his service. I think the underlying bill, what we're trying to create is some uniformity across the state. Trying to create some uniformity across the state to make sure that everybody is treated equally. That some of the basics of not only the training in the underlying bill, but just making sure that everybody is doing their due diligence to make sure that they are in fact able and willing and well, I think just able to carry a firearm. And I think our reservists are at the top of that list. And I'm willing to work with the good gentleman to see if there's more work that we can do to refine this bill. I think he makes some compelling arguments. But the heart of the bill is to make sure that all Washingtonians are treated equally, to make sure that we have a safe system for purchasing firearms. So at this point, I would ask you to join me in voting no on this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks? Representative Defoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to respond to you about the comments from the good gentleman from the 21st. We need to make sure that we're not creating redundant laws here in the state of Washington. The underlying bill will do that with respect to our Guard, members of the Guard and also our reservists. You have to complete an annual weapons qualification in order to continue to be a participant in the Guard or the Reserve. So our service, our men and women in uniform are already doing this requirement. So why would they have to take an extra class, an extra program to prove that they can do something that the United States military, the United States government has already certified that they are capable of doing? So this really is just an extra burden on folks who are busy taking care of their families, busy with their civilian jobs, and busy with their military reserve obligations. The good gentleman from the 21st suggested that this bill could be improved, and I agree. It could be improved most effectively by going away, but short of that, we need to address this issue here tonight before we pass the bill. It can't be improved in the House of Representatives if we pass the bill tonight. So let's take a pause and let's fix the issues that have been identified and that the good gentleman from the 21st acknowledged, and let's vote yes on this amendment in the meantime.
Further remarks? Good member from the 25th, Representative Keaton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can guarantee that our National Guard and our Armed Forces Reserves are doing their due diligence, and we can make this bill better by adopting this amendment.
Further remarks? Good member from the 17th District, Representative Stevie.
All right, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think we're entering into a really dangerous area with this. We have our reservists, and they're active right now. They're once a year being qualified. Right now, the United States,
we are either your best friend or your worst enemy. People fear us, and we want to keep that. We're weakening ourselves by doing this. If we make this hard for our reservists to be able to purchase weapons, to train on their own, to teach other people, like their kids, how to respect weapons, it's almost like the movie Red Dawn. You know, I don't know if you remember that. The premise of that movie was we were invaded by the Russians, and a group of high schoolers go up into the hills, and, you know, they protect the country. But that's the basics of this. We have people that are training, and we don't want to dilute that and weaken our country. So I think this bill, or this amendment, is very important, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Further remarks. Good member from the 31st District, 31st District, Representative Penner. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had to look around for a moment. 6169451. 21 years ago, that was the rifle that was issued to me. I already told you, Mr. Speaker, I served 8 years in the United States Marine Corps. 21 years ago, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. I was unremarkable as a Marine. I mean, I spent 8 years, became a sergeant, led Marines. I'm not a combat veteran. I don't have a combat action ribbon. I didn't trade rounds with the enemy when I was deployed to Iraq. But you know what I did every year? I did a known distance course of fire. I did movement and immediate action drills, including a movement course. I did the things and more 21 years ago, every single year, multiple times a year, that this permit would require. The Marines I know right now drilling, the National Guard drilling, the folks that we have right now doing these things every single year, like I did all those years ago, don't need to do it again
to receive the right to purchase something that they already have a right to purchase and own. I urge your support of this amendment. All it does is respect those that are already receiving the training that it appears that the bill would request of anyone else. Thank you.
Further remarks. The good member from the 19th District, Representative McIntyre.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman from the 21st mentioned that when we set out to do policy, we need to make sure that everyone is treated fairly, equally. That is a very good outlook. That's something that we should strive for. But for you and I to reject this amendment does the opposite. It does treat people unfairly. And let me explain how. This is a very interesting distinction between a previous amendment where we discussed that every veteran had to go through combat training. Well, like the good gentleman from the 4th said, that it was quite a few years ago he went through. It can be a few years for any veteran between their last training session, but for reservists and guard, they train regularly. I have to be on a range every single year. And now, how will I be treated with this? I have to do double the training. I have to go in and train at Fort Lewis, and then I have to come back out, get into my civilian clothes, and go to another range and train again. I have to do double. That's not fair. It doesn't make any sense. So, especially for our Guard and reservists, it is even more practical to allow them to be able to buy, sell, and engage in their rights, which they should be allowed to do, without impairment, but with that training applying and meaning something. That training has to mean something, Mr. Speaker. It's not nothing. It has to stand for something, anything. But from what I can tell from the underlying legislation, the bill, it counts for nothing. You're going to treat me like someone who's never touched a gun before?
treat me like someone that doesn't know? It has to mean something. And with this amendment, it will. With this amendment, we can treat Washington citizens equally before the law. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? The member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we have heard tonight from some of the members about how persons in the Guard and Reserve frequently have secret clearances, have other screenings that have checked into their background. One thing that I recall from my service is that when we had soldiers who would get a DUI, when we had soldiers that would be in any sort of a domestic dispute, and if they found themselves on the wrong side of the law and they lost their right to own a firearm, they were separated from the military for that. For these people, these members of our Guard and Reserve, to remain eligible to be in service, they must retain the right to own a firearm, or they will be separated. Without this amendment, we are going to be doing additional and enhanced checks that are redundant. They cost money to our service members, and this check is already being done every time they drill because they have the right, or we wouldn't have them in our Guard or Reserve. So I urge this adoption.
Further remarks? The member from the 18th District, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge adoption of this amendment. May I read, Mr. Speaker?
Please proceed.
This is a text from a constituent. He served in the United States Navy, got a few jobs as a civilian, and became a United States Treasury agent where he served for 3 decades. A decade and a half after he retired, the story begins. When I retired as a federal agent, I stopped carrying a weapon. On Christmas Eve, a police officer friend advised me to start carrying again because Intel suggested there were people looking for retired law enforcement officers because we would be, quote, easy pickings, unquote. Later that same day, I returned home to 2 burglars who'd broken in. One guy had a pistol and decided to shoot me. His 2 shots went past my ear and over the top of my head. My 3 shots missed him as well. If I was not armed, would they have let me live, being a witness? I don't think trusting criminals with my or anyone's life is a good bet. I'm glad I survived, but another Clark County resident a few years later wasn't so lucky. 2 burglars killed him and set him on fire while he was still alive. In my case, and the other Clark County resident, these men were caught and convicted. At least I'm alive to tell my story. This constituent and friend had the training and instincts to properly defend his family and his property. I urge the adoption of this amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks? The member from the 4th District, Representative Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was a little boy, we lived by Fort Carson, Colorado, and the convoys would drive past our house of soldiers, and I'd wave to them. It was a big deal if they waved back because, shortly before that, my father and those guys had won World War II. They were heroes to us. My grandfather was severely wounded in the Battle of the Argonne Forest and was crippled for life. So what really struck me when I was driving an Army truck myself through Oregon, a car went by me, there's a little boy in the back seat, and he was flipping me off. And what really got me was his parents were laughing. So it just seems like it's the respect for the American soldier has gone downhill, although people will say, thank you for your service. But that's a nice thought. But actions speak louder than words, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks, the good member from the 35th District, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We often talk about lived experience, but with our armed forces, reserves, and our National Guard, it's not just lived experience, they're still living it. They're still living it every single day. We've heard that they're still going to their drill sessions, they're still training. And Mr. Speaker, if we ask someone in the National Guard or the Armed Forces Reserves to go defend our country at the drop of a hat, what is the first thing we do? We slap a rifle in their hand and send them off to war or send them off to defend us from something else. There's no permit to purchase when we do that. There's no background check. Well, they've already done background checks. Mr. Speaker, this is the most common sense amendment that I have seen yet tonight. If you were going to exempt anyone from this bill, although we should exempt every citizen of the state of Washington because it's clearly unconstitutional, at least you could exempt our National Guard and reserves. Mr. Speaker, these are the people we honored not too long ago at the beginning of our session. And now we want to take apart their constitutional rights, ask them to get another background check, one that's probably a lower level than that they've already have right now, ask them to get a permit to purchase after signing on the dotted line for our country to defend our freedoms home and abroad, to defend the very constitutional rights that this underlying bill seeks to undermine. It isn't fair. It isn't about uniformity. This is about control. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks, the good member from the 6th District, Representative Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising in support of this amendment as an Army reservist veteran and the proud mother of 2 active duty military service members. Mr. Speaker, we are in dangerous territory, not only with the underlying bill, but with this amendment, especially if it is not adopted. Why do I say that? This is a national security issue. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you are fully well aware that for a long time our borders have been wide open, with individuals coming here that do pose a threat. That is the whole reason for our Second Amendment, which is directly connected to this amendment. We have had fighting age young men that have come over, and we also have issues with gang members. Do you or I think that they're going to care about having a permit? I think we've already seen that in this state. And I worry, Mr. Speaker, that we are particularly vulnerable in this state because of the stand that the people that may seek to do us harm have seen. Somebody that is worried about being hurt themselves is going to take more care. And if our trained individuals, if it's harder for them, God forbid if something happens, whether it's gang related or something else. I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but in my neighborhood and in the district that I represent, I would be utterly grateful for those trained individuals being able to protect my family, the businesses around us, our neighborhoods, my family that I care about, and the people that I serve. In the interest of protecting our state and national security, I am urging you, please, Mr. Speaker. Please support this amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 266. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. Division has been called. The Speaker is about to start the roll call machine. Speaker has started the roll call machine. Has every member who wishes to vote voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. Speaker has locked the roll call machine. The clerk will please take the record.
Mr. Speaker, there are 42 yeas, 47 nays, 2 excused.
Amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment 279. Clerk will read.
On page 4, line 31, after of a strike, certified.
Last line.
Insert section 4 of this act.
Good member from the 12th District, Representative Burnett, to move adoption of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please move 279.
Amendment 279 has been moved and seconded for adoption. Remarks? Good member from the 12th, Representative Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, good morning. So on this one, we're going to focus on one word, certified. And at first glance, it might seem like, why would you take this out? That seems like such an important piece of this policy. And that might be easily convinced unless you look a little further. And so hopefully you'll be able to understand where I'm going with this. For the certification, I'm going to ask one simple thing, and then we'll just talk briefly on what that means. My wife would, a lot of the times as a sheriff, say, would you write bullet points? Because it's not to make sure you say the right thing. It's to make sure you don't say too much. So I'm going to keep this short. Is it attainable? What does that mean? One, is it possible? Is it available? Is it feasible? And I think most importantly, is it accessible? And to be equitable, there could be some people, is it affordable? Does it meet those things? I think in some of the parts of Washington State, I would say absolutely not. If this process was put in place, we've seen in the past, a lot of programs come in with great ideas, but they weren't set up and they weren't ready to run. And we see this big lag time and things get stacked up or the computer system fails. But this is a process that has yet to be put in place. And what does it mean to be certified? So having said those things, I hope that you would join me in approving this amendment. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks? The member from the 22nd District, Representative Parsley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And once again, you've been hearing it all night, or I guess morning now. I'm going to be brief. This motion undermines the Washington State Police, and I personally trust them. So I'm going to urge no. They are best suited for this, and it's essential that we have the trust across the state for certification. So with due respect to my colleague from the 12th District, I would like to say no.
Further remarks? Good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a good amendment. Please vote yes. In fact, this amendment allows the Washington State Patrol to focus on its core mission, which is encouraging public safety on the roads and enforcing the law. To give the Washington State Patrol a new assignment to come up with a system for certifying a process which doesn't exist currently and will almost certainly come under legal challenge and scrutiny as it is unconstitutional, is not a good use of the Washington State Patrol's time or resources. Let's let the troopers focus on their core job, which is enforcing the law and assuring public safety, and not have to be involved in what are frankly administrative and bureaucratic efforts
that are likely to be overturned as soon as this issue gets to the Ninth Circuit. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks, the good member from the 26th District, Representative Cloutier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say that it is so grateful to hear that we now trust law enforcement on this floor, because a couple years ago that was not the dialogue. Thank you.
And the remarks to the body to keep remarks to the policy at hand. Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 279. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. Further remarks? Amendment.
Of Amendment 291.
Amendment 291 has been moved and seconded. Remarks? Representative Penner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It feels like it's been a whole amendment since we discussed this. Permission to read?
Please proceed.
Thank you. I think it's important that I read this piece because of the structure of my statement on this amendment. The effect of this amendment is that it provides that a permit to purchase firearms may, rather than must, contain a unique permit number, expiration date, and the permit holder's name, date of birth, residential address, and a description, whatever that is, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is about data hygiene. First principles of data hygiene, Mr. Speaker, is anything you put into the world someone else can consume. I don't believe that that's the right approach that we should be taking with this bill. In fact, I think we should be collecting as little information as is necessary, because when we share information, whether it's on a permit, a government database, on the internet, it doesn't matter where we share it, somebody else has access to that information. I don't want somebody else having access to my residential address when I hand them a permit to do something. I don't want to see them having access to it because I don't know what they're going to do with that. I don't want a description of who I am because I don't know how I've been described, and I don't think the world needs to know how I'm described. In fact, I don't think most of the information in the underlying bill that the underlying bill seeks to retain about me is necessary for me to prove that I should have the right to purchase something that I already have a right to purchase. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we need to look at first principles of data hygiene. This is not the only conversation that we've had this session about data hygiene. We've talked about it in a number of different areas, and we're going to keep talking about it in different areas. I think we should apply those same principles to this bill. Please support this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks? Good member from the 45th District, Representative Goodman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The underlying bill ensures that each of the permits are uniform in terms of the information on them. Mr. Speaker, my driver's license and your driver's license have the same information on it. You certainly have a more youthful appearance. Your passport and my passport have the same information on them. The amendment proposes to make permissive whether the same information should be on each permit. We might as well not have the permit at all if they're not all going to be providing the same information. And so I am asking that we not adopt this amendment because it would create all sorts of ambiguity for the dealers and for the Washington State Patrol. We need uniformity. We need the same information on every permit so that they're easily identifiable and enforceable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks? Good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Great amendment. Please vote yes. What a great idea. Let's have no permit at all. I like that a lot.
Member will please speak with regards to the policy and refrain from sarcasm, please. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new standard, refrain from sarcasm. I will. No sarcasm. This is an amendment that protects privacy. Mr. Speaker, while we will hear a lot, I suspect, in our continuing conversation about this constitutionally dubious proposition, the underlying bill, we'll hear a lot about Article 1, Section 24 in our Washington State Constitution, which states clearly that your right to keep and bear a firearm in defense of yourself and your community shall not be impaired and this permit would certainly be an impairment of your exercise of that right that is reserved to you. I want to talk about Article 1, Section 7, which is the part of the Washington State Constitution that talks about privacy. And in Article 1, Section 7, it says that your right to not be disturbed in your person, in your affairs, is sacrosanct, is reserved to you. The right to privacy that's discussed in our state constitution is a right explicitly enumerated that is not explicitly enumerated in the federal constitution. It's only implied. The language in the underlying bill about what these constitutionally dubious permits would include, the information that they would include, which my good colleague from the 31st has discussed in some detail in his remarks, this is your personal affairs. And to have them kept on a permit, Mr. Speaker, and kept in some form of registry, Mr. Speaker, that is an impairment and an infringement of your right to privacy enumerated in Article 1, Section 7. So while the underlying proposal is constitutionally dubious under Article 1, Section 24, I think it's also constitutionally dubious under Article 1, Section 7, and this good amendment cleans up a little bit of that constitutional defect. Please vote yes, and I mean no sarcasm.
Further remarks? Good member from the 35th, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment. You know, the good gentleman from the 31st was talking a lot about the databases and data privacy that, you know, we've seen probably in other areas throughout the sessions and sessions past, and now we talk about it here in this amendment. And I just find it striking that you know, things like passports and driver's license, they're not constitutional amendment. They're not constitutional rights. They're privileges. They're privileges. But we're talking about fundamental constitutional rights. Second Amendment rights, Article 1, Section 24 of our state's Constitution. And anywhere in fundamental rights, do we expect to hold a database and collect a lot of personal data on people to exercise their religion, to exercise their freedom of speech? No, we don't. And people would find that fundamentally wrong, and it's fundamentally wrong in this underlying bill, and we shouldn't be doing it. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 291. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. No! Amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment 275. Clerk will read.
On page 7, after line 37, insert the following.
Last line.
Percent of the state median income adjusted for household size.
Good member from the 20th District, Representative Barno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 275.
It has been moved. The amendment has been moved and seconded. Remarks. Representative Barno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lowering the financial burden to own a firearm only ensures equal access to the Second Amendment and Second Amendment rights. Washington State already has the highest crime rate in the nation, among the most burglaries per capita, and as we know, Mr. Speaker, the lowest number of law enforcement officers per capita in the country. In many cases, in many communities, especially rural communities, response by law enforcement is often delayed, it's not very fast, and the Second Amendment and the use of the Second Amendment rights is a way to protect self and property. Can I read the effect statement from the amendment?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment exempts a permit applicant from all fees associated with an application or renewal of a permit to purchase firearms if the person has a household income that is less than 200% of the state median income adjusted for household size. Mr. Speaker, financial burdens such as costly permit fees, mandatory training costs, disproportionately affect marginalized communities. Historically, onerous fees like these costs have been used to suppress the ability of many communities, many people in those communities, from exercising their constitutional rights and owning a firearm. This amendment reduces those permit costs. The costs in this amendment, I believe, will allow individuals from all backgrounds to better exercise their constitutional rights to self-defense and to personal protection. Mr. Speaker, the Second Amendment applies to all citizens, and financial barriers shouldn't limit who can exercise that right. This amendment will lower those costs and ensure equal access to the Second Amendment. I'd ask for a yes vote.
Further remarks? Good member from the 3rd District, Representative Ormsby.
Thank you, Speaker Timmons. Top of the morning to you. I rise to respectfully ask for a no on this amendment. While I appreciate the intent and spirit of the amendment, I think there's better ways to go about doing it. I believe that community organizations that are in neighborhoods or trusted messengers in different communities can help assist, get the word out, etc., in order to alleviate any pressure or intimidation that folks might feel going towards it. It also undermines the ability of the Washington State Patrol to administer the program. So this is, while a well-intended amendment, really impacts the implementation of the underlying bill. Would ask for no vote.
Further remarks? Good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We hear a lot on this floor about regressive tax policy, about regressive policies in general, about policies that cut harshly against the underprivileged, the less wealthy, the underrepresented. This policy, the underlying policy, is definitely regressive. It will add costs to the exercise of a constitutionally enumerated right, one could say akin to a poll tax, that cuts particularly strongly against the people with the least amount of money. I mean, it's going to cost several $100s to get fingerprints taken and fill out the permit, even before you get to the point of actually buying a gun or ammunition or any of the stuff you need to buy to defend yourself in increasingly dangerous neighborhoods around the state. This is a regressive fee. It's a regressive tax, Mr. Speaker. This amendment tries to alleviate some of the regressive nature of this restrictive policy. In the interest of progressive policy, please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? Good member from the 4th District, Representative Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we've been talking about veterans and their rights, but let's talk about single mothers. A single mother needs to protect herself. There's no man around. She has to be both mother and father. By the time the police get there, it's kind of a cleanup job if she's really in danger. So a woman needs an equalizer. And why burden her with extra fees and actually just in doing that depriving her of her right to self-defense? Thank you.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 275. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. Division has been called. The Speaker is about to start the roll call machine. The Speaker has started the roll call machine. Has every member who wishes to vote voted? Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Will the clerk please take the record?
Mr. Speaker, there are 39 yeas, 52 nays, 2 excused.
The amendment is not adopted. There are additional amendments. Amendment 276. Clerk will read.
On page 11, line 26, after fee, insert.
Last line.
Not to exceed $20.
Good member from the 20th District, Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of Amendment 276.
It has been moved and seconded. Remarks, Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You can see on the board this amends page 11, line 26. More specifically, it's section 7 of the bill. You know, on the First Amendment that was offered, we heard an argument that it shouldn't be passed because it was vague. It was inexact. Well, I believe that section 7 is vague and inexact. And my amendment tries to cure that very problem of it being vague and inexact. It also goes to address some of the other problems that we've heard about people who want to defend themselves, but maybe they're lower income. This underlying bill allows the county to set whatever amount they want to set. My amendment, and I could have just set the amount, or I could have just tried to take the amount out. But what I did was I said, let's set a maximum of $20. We'll give the local government an opportunity to decide, do they want to be at the $20 or do they want to be a little bit lower than that? In many communities, the county may decide that it's actually better to not charge anything or to charge a lower amount. And this amendment gives them that opportunity, but it does set a maximum amount so that we don't make this too regressive. And some may be concerned that we're going to put a dollar amount in statute. And maybe there's concern that, you know, we shouldn't do that. But Mr. Speaker, there is plenty of precedent for this being done in our state statutes. In fact, we have bills in front of us this very legislative session that would change the amount that a treasurer can charge to collect the REIT. And it would change it from $5 to, guess what? $20. We have a bill in front of the Transportation Committee that says how much more our subagents could get. We state in law the exact number that they can collect. Instead of being vague as it is currently in section 7 of the bill, let us be a little more specific and say no more than $20. Please adopt the amendment.
Further remarks. Good member from the 3rd District, Representative Ormsby.
Thank you, Speaker Timmons. I rise asking for a no vote from a good friend from the 20th. And the reason is it undermines local police agencies from being able to set fees at a rate at which that works for that local community. And they should be the ones determining the amounts for the permit to purchase fees. And I think it is maybe less vague than the language, but it is arbitrary. There is no correlation between no more than $20 and the actual cost of what it would be. And we don't want to hamper the local government's ability to administer this program. And I think those local government agencies are the ones best to understand what it will take to administer the program and are the best ones able to set those fees.
Further remarks. The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good amendment. Please vote yes. Mr. Speaker, this policy, the underlying policy, is going to be a financial hardship on some people in our state. And the cost of getting fingerprints taken, of getting biometrics taken, it can be hundreds of dollars or more. To allow that piece of this permitting process to be an amount undetermined, that's arbitrary. What we're setting with this amendment is clarity, is specificity, and is protection for the single mother, for the person just starting out in life, for a person who may have more limited means than you or I. Let's give those people a break. Let's give them better access to personal security. Let's give them better access to justice by keeping this administrative fee low and clearly stated. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Costs are something that have been affecting everybody in our state. Rising costs for everything. I mean, us as good stewards of public funds, we have the duty to be responsible with money, and by limiting this, we're making sure that we are offsetting money for our constituents that could potentially be used other places. I find it fitting for me to point out, considering my current seat that I'm occupying, that the price of eggs has increased 700 or 800%. People are having a real hard time right now making ends meet. And those people that are feeling it the most are also people that may live in communities that they need to be able to defend themselves. And this is creating a roadblock. We want to make sure that we don't impede an individual's right to defend themselves. And this amendment, if we adopt it, will make sure that we decrease that to a reasonable amount. So I urge the adoption.
Further remarks? The member from the 12th District, Representative Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the thing that I would add here that I think is very beneficial for everyone involved that's going to have to travel, a lot of our agencies are only open specific hours. I know this is true with Wenatchee Police Department, Chelan County Sheriff's Office, Douglas County Sheriff's Office. Those are the ones that I'm familiar with. And there's certain days or certain hours they're not available. And this could be a hardship on people to maybe have to take time off, lose income. This is a way to offset that. I urge a yes vote. Thank you.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 276. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. There are additional amendments. Amendment 292. The clerk will read.
On page 11, line 28, after fingerprints.
Last line.
Estate median income adjusted for household size.
Good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall, will move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 292.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 292 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like we just heard, we're trying to find ways that would help our constituents in the event that this bill passes, help them save some money. This amendment, if adopted, would ensure that another one of the costs that can accumulate very quickly is minimized. So I don't think we need to go through the same arguments we all just heard. I would urge the adoption of this just to help with the costs for our constituents.
Further remarks? The good member from the 36th District, Representative Reed.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I am delighted to be with you here this morning to work on this important amendment, on this important bill about saving the lives of people in Washington State. I really do want to thank the good member for bringing this amendment forward. I think that we are always delighted when our colleagues across the aisle are interested, Mr. Speaker, in addressing.
Please keep remarks to the policy at hand. Please continue, Representative Reed.
Your pardon, Mr. Speaker. I'll just note on this policy, I'm going to rise and respectfully ask for a no vote. I think there are other ways that we could get to the spirit of this amendment. How do we ensure that permits and fingerprinting remain affordable for people? As when I was getting my top secret security clearance, I had to get fingerprinted for that quite often. And I know it's important that that be an affordable cost. Did a little bit of research, Mr. Speaker. Typical cost for getting fingerprinted in the state of Washington is somewhere between $5 and $25. City of Pasco, $5. State Patrol, $12.05. City of Longview, $15 for the first card. So I would just say, Mr. Speaker, there are, and I would also note, Mr. Speaker, to speak to this amendment specifically, the 200% AMI in our state for a family of 4 is about $264,000 in income a year. So I want to think about how we can ensure that the truly low income in our state are able to afford these costs. And Mr. Speaker, I want to ensure we're being truthful about the costs of fingerprinting in our state, which I encourage folks to research. So respectfully ask for a no, Mr. Speaker, and wish you a very good morning.
Further remarks, Representative Defoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The good lady from the 36th makes an important point. She talked about when she got her top secret security clearance, she got her fingerprints taken. I think that illustrates why this should not cost any money, because when you get a top secret security clearance through the United States military, you don't pay for that. I think that's important, especially folks who don't have the funds to do that. So I think that's a very important point. If we're going to force people to get fingerprints, then we need to make sure that there's not a cost involved to that. Please support this amendment.
Further remarks, the member from the 31st District, Representative Penner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some brief remarks. While I don't refute the cost of fingerprinting, because I don't know, I imagine that it doesn't cost very much. I can tell you just briefly, anecdotally, what it takes me to get fingerprinted in my community. See, we don't have fingerprinting available in my community. I have to drive an hour away to go get fingerprinted. So I know that while let's just say $15 might be the cost of getting fingerprinted, what about the half day off of work? What about the other intangible costs? And so there are intangible costs up to and including time off from work, which I imagine is not compensated as sick time, as well as childcare costs and other things. So I think the cost is certainly more substantial than $15. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks, the good member from the 17th, Representative Stevie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just see this as one more burden, taking away weapons from the good people and putting them into the hands of the bad people. I urge you to vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a good amendment. Please vote yes. Mr. Speaker, when we charge citizens, residents, to exercise constitutional rights, we are entering a difficult area in the law and in our history, Mr. Speaker. In our history in this country, we used to have poll taxes. Now, it was just $1 or $2. The amount wasn't a great deal. But these poll taxes have been widely and rightly rejected as unconstitutional, as a barrier to the exercise of a right. And we have come to the place, the good place in our law, in our public policy, that you don't charge people for exercising enumerated rights. Now, there are semantic games that are played with what is a fee, what is a tax, but the point is, when you begin charging people, whether you call it a fee or a tax, to exercise a constitutional right, which keeping and bearing a firearm in defense of yourself and the state is, you're in troubled ground. You're in constitutionally dubious ground. Now, you'll hear references, well, you have to pay a fee to get a driver's license. Well, driving is not an enumerated constitutional right. It's a privilege. And even though it may be considered controversial, keeping and bearing a gun in your home or on your person or in your vehicle in defense of yourself is an enumerated constitutional right. We should not be charging people to exercise that right. What this amendment is trying to do, and it doesn't even do it completely, but it gets us in the direction of not charging many people for the right to exercise their right. It's a good amendment. It's made in good faith. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? The member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So one of the things this amendment would do is limit who has to pay the fee for fingerprinting. We've heard lots of discussion tonight about how much it costs with some of our agencies. This specifically would ensure that localities don't charge additional fees. I know that myself and my spouse, when we wanted to volunteer in our local schools, we were required to get fingerprinted. We were not charged for the background check fee, just the fingerprint fee through an agency that was selected by the district. And that was $72 each. And that was for a volunteer position in the schools. What this is going to do is limit who has to pay and limit out of control stacking fees that may happen with the implementation of the underlying legislation. So I urge this adoption.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 292. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment 272. Clerk will read.
On page 25, beginning on line 32, after issue, strike all material through on line 37 and insert a concealed pistol license, permit to purchase firearms, or alien firearm license wrongly refused.
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
Good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move the adoption of Amendment 272.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 272 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is a little technical. This has to do with what happens if the bureaucrats screw up and wrongly deny you the permit to purchase, the constitutionally dubious permit to purchase, or a CPL or other permits related to keeping and bearing a firearm. Currently, basically, the amendment rolls back the standard to where it is now in the law. What the underlying bill would do is it would make you go to Superior Court and basically sue the state to try to get the wrong conclusion righted. What this does is it says, no, do away with that and go back to what we've got, where you can go directly to the agency and use what's called a writ of mandamus to try to get the bad decision corrected. To spare the technicality as we're into the early morning here, it's a little easier to do it that way than to have to sue in Superior Court. So really, Mr. Speaker, the elegance of the amendment is it just goes back to the existing standard in our law. For simplicity's sake, for making things simpler for someone who got treated poorly by bureaucrats running this fakakta program, please vote yes.
Further remarks? Good member from the 36th District, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree. Please vote for this elegant amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 272. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment 267. Clerk will read.
On page 27, after line 3, insert the following.
Last line.
Section shall be awarded reasonable attorney's fees and costs.
The good member from the 7th District, Representative Abel, to move adoption of amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 267.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 267 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Abel.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment also deals with a situation where a government agency has incorrectly failed to permit the transfer of the firearm or the issuance of the permit to purchase. what my amendment proposes is that in those circumstances, when an individual brings a proceeding in the court system and prevails, so the judge has determined that in fact the transfer of the firearm or the issuance of the license was unlawful, was unlawfully denied, in other words, the individual has prevailed in their proceeding, that they should be awarded reasonable attorney's fees. I believe this is an appropriate method to help promote lawful activity by our government when addressing the issuance of the permit to purchase or approving the transfer of the firearm. There is a helpful...
The Speaker will remind members to please take conversations to the wings. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a helpful example we can look at, and that is the provisions at 42 U.S.C. 1983 and 1988 at the federal level that provide the possibility of attorney's fees for a prevailing plaintiff who has their rights denied under color of law. So this is not unusual. This is done at the federal level. I believe it should be done at the state level, again, for those individuals who are wrongfully denied the issuance of the permit to purchase or wrongfully denied the ability to transfer the firearm. There's a very simple reason for this, and that is because an individual should not have to raid the children's college fund or raid their retirement fund in order to exercise a constitutional right. I ask this be adopted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks? The good member from the 30th District, Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The awarding of attorney fees in most constitutional matters are not appropriate and should be reserved primarily for civil court and civil actions and private right of actions. And so I'm asking for a no vote on this particular amendment. We don't want to create a perverse incentive of increased litigation, especially if the original point and the original request is to reverse the denial of the approval of the application.
Further remarks? Good member from the 19th, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know some people are actually watching this debate on TVW or by other means, and I've gotten a few comments already from people either cheering us on in our lively discussion or reprimanding me for being sarcastic.
Please speak to the policy at hand. Please continue, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fair point. We like the English rule, which basically says the loser pays in legal disputes. While it's true that the English rule often applies in civil matters, and this would not be a civil matter, I think it would be a good refinement of what we're doing in public policy here, because if the bureaucrats screw up your application, you know, they ought to pay your legal fees for getting it all straightened out. It's a good proposal. It will be just and I think equitable. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 267. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. Division has been called. The Speaker is about to start the roll call machine. The Speaker has started the roll call machine. Has every member who wishes to vote voted? Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Will the clerk please take the record?
Mr. Speaker, there are 38 yeas, 50 nays, 2 excused.
The amendment is not adopted. There are additional remarks. Additional amendments. Amendment 211. Clerk will read.
On page 39, line 24, after effect, strike November 1st.
Last line.
Program.
Good member from the 25th District, Representative Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 211.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 211 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not too long ago, Oregon stood up a program like this, and although they have their classes in place now, initially they had trouble getting their classes started, and people were unable to take the class that was required to get the permit that the legal new law required. And so this amendment would just say that the State Patrol needs to stand up the class and have it all ready to go, and then let us know when they're ready, and then we can implement this law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge a yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 36th, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that you vote against this amendment. We should not be delaying the effective date on this policy. This bill is critically important for public safety. This bill will save lives. Rulemaking is simply not enough. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good amendment. Please vote yes. We have seen in some of the background checks and other responsibilities that we put on the State Patrol in recent years, some issues, some challenges, some problems. Some of them have been technical, more of a computer database nature. Some of them have just been kind of organizational, logistical, difficulty getting background checks running the way they're supposed to. Since so much is being required of the State Patrol to implement the underlying policy, I think it's only practical and realistic that we make sure that the State Patrol has the systems in place to do this background check. I guess to create the registry and do all the other constitutionally dubious things that we would be charging it to do in the underlying policy. If they're not even ready to go by the date specific, we would be yet again in one of these situations where we're going to have to fix a broken policy with some future duct tape in this body. Let's not do that. Let's make sure that the State Patrol is ready to implement the FLCACTA policy before we begin the program. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? The good member from the 35th, Representative Griffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I've been working with Washington State Patrol this entire session about how do we end the backlog of for our crime lab. And they say it's going to take about $6 million and up to 2 to 3 years to get through the backlog in our crime lab. And that's delaying, Mr. Speaker, our ability to prosecute DUIs right now. And so access to justice right now in Washington State is a fleeting issue. So, Mr. Speaker, the WSP does not have the ability to complete their core mission right now because we have not given them the resources to do it. I do not know how we could expect them to pull this sort of thing, expecting them to manage a program, giving people the right to exercise their constitutional rights. I think it shouldn't be expected that they'd be able to pull it off in a very quick time frame. If they can't turn around one of their most important key core missions, how could they complete this mission? Mr. Speaker, this is a good amendment. WSP does not have the time, don't have the resources to pull this off. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge its adoption.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 211. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment 264. Clerk will read.
On page 39, at the beginning of line 26, after this act.
Last line.
Submitted on February 28, 2025.
The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 264.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 264 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think many of us who have paid attention to the appropriations meetings have heard this before. This is a standard null and void clause. Basically, if we don't have the funds to support this program, then this would be null and void. We have a duty as elected officials to be good stewards of public resources. Considering our current financial situation, I think that it would be prudent to not overextend ourselves and have more spending in a time where we really need to find ways to save. So I urge the adoption. Thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 30th District, Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe that this amendment actually misunderstands the funding structure of the bill and the intent of the bill, which is to be a self-sustaining system. And so I recommend, I urge your agreement with voting no on this amendment. There are thoughtful considerations around the fiscal amount and how it's promoted. And I also just want to remind the Speaker that the date referenced in the amendment does not exist in 2025, and so that could become an issue of contention should it be enacted into law. So I urge your vote of no.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 264. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The amendment is not adopted. There are additional amendments. Amendment 260, the clerk will read.
On page 1, beginning on line 20, after purchasers.
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
Good member from the 8th District, Representative Connors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Amendment 260.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 260 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Connors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment itself would take back to current law, which was passed in January of was put into effect in January of 2024, that residents had to do a firearms training course in order to purchase a firearm in Washington State. This new bill requires live fire training. And I don't know if you know the difference, Mr. Speaker, between live fire training and dry fire training. But I've said it on the House floor before, my kids are competitive athletes in shooting sports. They practice every week in our garage dry fire training. It's how they prepare, it's how they get ready. Almost every competitive shooter will tell you that they do dry fire training. It's a big part of what they do. Dry fire training for people who are actually teaching these classes is really important. The reason why? Gun ranges around Washington State keep depleting because of legislation that's happening in this body. And we're going to require live fire training for anyone who wants a permit in Washington State when there are other options for this kind of training. We're going to take away, in a state that has permission to read, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
The third highest crime rate in the nation and the second highest property crime rate. And we do not have the facilities for people that need to be helped to get these permits to do live fire training when we have an option to help people who want to get these permits. A lot of people that live in urban areas especially would have to travel really far to be able to take these courses to be able to practice firearms. When you have firearm instructors that will tell you that dry fire training is just as effective as live fire. So for people who live in urban areas, not me, Mr. Speaker, but people who live in urban areas, this is going to completely decimate their access to their Second Amendment rights. Please vote.
Further remarks? The good member from the 22nd District, Representative Dolio.
Thank you, Speaker Timmons. Rising to ask for a no on this amendment. When I was around 7 or 8, my Uncle Mutt committed suicide by gun. That was a very overwhelming thing to deal with as a young child. As a result of that, my mother required my father to remove every gun from the house. I don't know, he maybe had 1 rifle, maybe 2. I never lived in a house with a gun again, and I still don't. I've been in a house, I've spent the night in a house with a gun, I saw the gun, but honestly, I haven't had very much experience with a gun.
Please state your point.
The member does not seem to be speaking to the motion before us.
Will the member please constrain remarks to the amendment before the body? The point is well taken. Please proceed.
Thank you. So the point I am making here is that if I were to go and purchase a gun, I would need training. 100%. You would not want me to own a gun and not have live training, live shooting training. I don't have that experience. So, Speaker Timmons, I feel like this is a very important part of this bill, and this amendment undermines a very essential part of that, which is requiring training, deep training, to make sure that anyone who owns a gun knows how to use it and uses it responsibly. Please vote this amendment down.
Further remarks, the good member from the 2nd District, Representative Barkas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I was listening to the comments from the gentlelady of the 8th. You know, Mr. Speaker, here in Thurston County, if my memory serves me right, we have one, maybe two places that a person can complete live fire exercises, training. Mr. Speaker, those are not necessarily just open to the public, one of which is a private club. So you have to pay in order to participate in that. Mr. Speaker, this is another encumbrance for the people of Washington State to be able to get the proper training that is necessary, which can be accomplished through dry fire training. I know this, Mr. Speaker. I've done it myself. I know this, Mr. Speaker, because my wife completed a course here in Lacey that had all the proper training for her to be able to acquire her permit. Mr. Speaker, when we start thinking about and we listen to so many arguments on this floor about preventative measures that inhibit certain people from or groups from being able to participate in things because of the cost or the barriers or everything else, this is another barrier. Mr. Speaker, you start thinking about the cost of ammunition. If you have to go through this training, depending on what it is that you're training on, the cost can vary from, $20 for a box or more for ammunition. That's a barrier, Mr. Speaker. This is just another piece that puts a barrier in front of people from being able to acquire the proper training that already exists. There are schools and procedures and classes that do the training that is necessary to acquire the proper permits to do what is necessary. This is a necessary amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I urge the adoption of it.
Further remarks, the good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an essential amendment. Please vote yes. Mr. Speaker, your right to buy and keep a gun for your own protection is specifically enumerated in both the state and federal constitutions, and what someone else might want in your experience, in your training, relevant to your exercise of that right is not relevant. You have that right. It is specifically enumerated. And what I love about our state constitution in Article 1, Section 24 is it says why it's specifically enumerated. That you can defend yourself, and by defending yourself, by extension, you defend your neighbors in the whole state. This is an essential, foundational, constitutional right, and what other people think that you ought to do before you exercise that right is not germane. The amendment protects your ability to exercise that right because, as you've heard, and it's true, live fire training is hard to find and it's expensive. It is a barrier to your exercise of that constitutional right. And, Mr. Speaker, more, you've got to do it repeatedly under the proposal in the underlying bill. No, it's a restriction on your ability to exercise your right. Protect that right and vote yes on this amendment.
Further remarks, the good member from the 26th District, Representative Carrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've never owned a gun, and I probably never will. However, I do support our constitutional rights. And one of the reasons why I haven't talked much on this bill is because I'm not an expert in this area. And the frustrating thing that I've seen is that as these bills come forward, that there are people who are not experts on the policy matter.
Please speak to the amendment before the body. Please continue.
Oh, just wait. I'm getting there. But the thing is that I didn't know the difference between dry fire training and live fire training until this bill came before, because I'm not an expert in the field. And as I'm listening to everything that's going on today, there are many experts on our side of the aisle when it comes to firearm training. And it bamboozles me that we aren't accepting this amendment, because we should be listening to experts in the field. It makes absolutely no sense to have someone who isn't an expert, and this is something that is our constitutional right. We should listen to experts in the field, accept this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks, the good member from the 17th District, Representative Stevie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that people wouldn't just go out and buy a weapon, a pistol, without having training. I mean, that is important. But I have a friend, Carl Hoppel, that is running may I read?
Please proceed.
He has a crisis response training center. It's indoor, it's in a strip mall, and it's all laser pistol based. You have a screen, and it's just like operating a live fire handgun, but it's safe. You're not using live ammunition, but you run through the same functions to fire a real weapon. And this is training that people need to have. Nobody should just go out and buy one without having training. And so these centers provide that training. So I think that's very important, and this is a very important bill or option for this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks, seeing a good member from the 35th District, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just really briefly, the consequence of not adopting this amendment is that you will prevent access to anything in the underlying bill because it just won't have any live fire training available. And I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but you know, there's many of my constituents who are just so upset over the constant, what they feel is the attack of their Second Amendment rights. And an onerous requirement like requiring live fire training for every single person who has to get a permit to purchase. I mean, on top of the databases and the background checks and the fingerprints and the fees and everything that goes along with this as a barrier. I mean, it just starts to feel to my constituents that this is an intentional barrier that is there to serve to absolutely prevent them from even getting through all of the steps in the underlying bill. I mean, I live in a rural county, in a rural district. It's a little bit over the size of Rhode Island. And, you know, we just don't have these facilities. We just simply don't. And if all of a sudden everybody who is already, as of today, going through a lot more regulations and background checks with their FFL than most other states require, and yet we have some of the highest crime rates in our state. But we want to require live fire training for everybody, but we wouldn't exempt veterans who've already been through live fire training, or reservists who go through live fire training once at least or multiple times a year. That simply just doesn't make any sense to me, Mr. Speaker. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 260. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted.
Amendment number 302, clerk will read.
On page 3, beginning on line 11, after section 4, strike all material through
Last line.
internal references accordingly.
Representative Defoe to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 302.
It's been moved and seconded that amendment number 302 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Defoe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I describe this amendment, I'd like to tell a story about a gun shop in my district. It's called Best Way Pawn. 3 generations of Yakamaniacs ran this business, located on one of the most prominent intersections in the city of Yakima, Yakima Avenue and First Street. It was one of those land institutions, one of those landmarks where people, instead of using the street name, would say, go to Best Way Pawn and take a right. That's how established it was in the community. That business, Best Way Pawn, closed this month. After 70 years of operation in the city of Yakima. The reason they closed, Madam Speaker, is because of regulations that have been imposed, like in the underlying bill, on the sales of guns in the state of Washington. What this amendment does, Madam Speaker, is it takes away the registration requirement that is included in the underlying bill. So that other Best Way Pawns, other gun stores that have been community institutions across our state don't have more incentives, don't have more capitulations to the increased, unending increase of regulations and mandates on their ability to operate their businesses and serve their communities. Madam Speaker, I'd like to make another point on this amendment, why it's so important that we accept this particular change to the underlying bill. Madam Speaker, this amendment requires every dealer to record the permit number of the person who comes in to purchase a firearm. Madam Speaker, may I read from 18 U.S. Code 926?
Please proceed.
No rule or regulation prescribed after the enactment of this measure may require that records required to be maintained under this chapter or any portion of the content of such records be recorded at or transferred to a facility owned, managed, or controlled by the United States or any state or any political subdivision thereof, nor that any system of registration of firearms, firearms owners, firearms transactions, or dispositions be established. Nothing in this section expands or restricts authority to inquire into the disposition of any firearm in the course
15 seconds
of a criminal
remaining.
investigation. Madam Speaker, that is federal law. Without this amendment, the underlying bill violates federal law that specifically names states and prohibits gun registration requirements.
Further remarks? The good member from the 36th District, Representative Reed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising to respectfully ask a no to this amendment. Permit identification is essential to ensuring that permits are valid and proper and providing clarity to the state patrol and the enforcement of the law. So I ask you to vote no. Thank you.
Further remarks? The member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to finish up the thought and the argument that was made by the gentleman from the 15th. Again, it is 18 U.S. Code 926. And this gets to the heart of the issue of this amendment and the problem in the underlying policy that the amendment remedies. Madam Speaker, it is a serious matter. This matter of registries, this matter of lists, of databases. It is important to protecting the foundational right that you have and I have to protect ourselves with guns, with firearms, that they not be kept in registries. It's been a concern since the founding days of this country and this state that the government would keep lists of people and whether they were armed and how they were armed. It is essential to the independence and the freedom of a free people that the government does not keep these records. It's in federal law. It's been supported by a history of case law in our country. And Madam Speaker, I really believe it is essential to our notion of privacy rights that the government doesn't keep registries like this. Madam Speaker, if tyrants ever get control of government, they count on such databases, on such registries to do their nefarious work. It is essential that you and I protect our freedom, our liberty, our constitutional rights by not creating such databases, such registries. And that's what the amendment seeks to do in the underlying policy. We have to protect these civil liberties, Madam Speaker, and avoiding these registries is essential to protecting these civil liberties. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 302. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The amendment is not adopted. Amendment number 293, clerk will read.
On page 4, line 30, after resides.
Last line.
Material through requirement on line 15.
The member from the 18th District, Representative Lay, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move adoption of Amendment 293.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 293 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Lay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment makes it optional to have a certificate of completion. Madam Speaker, I know you join me in the extreme pride I feel that we have tens of thousands of members of the United States military in our state, or former members of the United States military, We also have thousands of members of law enforcement who proudly serve us each and every day. They are all well trained in the use of firearms. The members of our military already have a certificate of completion. It is called a DD 214. We also have members in our community who are rural landowners, ranchers and farmers. They oftentimes have family members that train them to use a firearm. They use their firearms to protect their livestock and their private property. They oftentimes live many, many minutes and sometimes an hour or more away from the local sheriff, so they need their firearm for protection. I believe my family and friends believe they have a certificate of completion, the United States Constitution and the Washington State Constitution. I also have a friend who feeds his family using either a bow and arrow or firearms. I don't believe we need a certificate of completion to feed your family. Madam Speaker, I urge adoption of this amendment. Thank you very much.
Representative Lee, my apologies for mispronouncing your name when I called on you. Further remarks? The good member from the 22nd District, Representative Dolio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Asking for a no on this amendment. It undermines the key component of this bill, which is the completion of certified training, of certified firearms safety training. Asking for a no.
Further remarks? The member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe this is a good amendment. As the previous speaker said, it allows for other options by which an individual could establish mastery and training of firearms use. And Madam Speaker, I think we need to be clear about what the essential parts of the underlying policy really are. I mean, is the essential part of the underlying policy to mandate a certification? Or is it to create a permitting process by which the sale or purchase of firearms could be regulated? It's my understanding, having read the proposal numerous times, that it's the second, not the first. In any event, Madam Speaker, this amendment simplifies and clarifies the mechanics of the underlying proposal. I guess we can discuss what those may be as we go along, but please vote yes on this clarifying amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 293. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment number 297, clerk will read.
On page 5, beginning on line 4, strike
Last
all
line.
internal references accordingly.
The good member from the 6th District, Representative Graham, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move 297.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 297 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Graham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I read the effect statement for accuracy?
Please proceed.
The effect. This amendment removes the requirement that an application for a permit to purchase firearms must include the applicant's physical description, race, and gender. Madam Speaker, I want this conversation to be very respectful. This is how I mean this. When we talk about requiring somebody's race, gender, their description, there are definitely concerns when it comes to other issues with profiling. Also, Madam Speaker, there are some things that we're dealing with now where gender is fluid, that you may have somebody that identifies as male and then they identify as female or something else. So practically, I don't understand what this looks like. If this information is taken down and this changes. This is a conversation, Madam Speaker, that I think is worthwhile having, and that is why I support this amendment in hopes that this is something that we as a society do have those conversations. So I am urging a yes for this amendment. Thank you.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the member from the 30th District, Representative Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge you to vote no on this amendment. Accepting this amendment could increase the likelihood of misidentification of individuals. Also, we collect information like gender and eye color and hair color on our driver's licenses, our identi cards, our passports. We collect information like race as part of our constitutionally mandated activity, the census. So I think we can obviously do that in this particular instance. Folks can self-identify, and what they provide is what they provide. I urge your no vote.
Further remarks? The member from the 35th District, Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment. You know, this amendment really just makes me think about when we require a description, including the race, to access your constitutional Second Amendment rights. It reminds me of a period in the past that is a stain in our country's history where we profiled people for other constitutional rights like voting. To me, Madam Speaker, there is no difference in asking for people to give their race and description to vote as there is to their race and description to access their rights to arm and defend themselves. I think that this amendment is essential in order to make sure that this underlying bill is slightly more constitutional than it is. And I mean, just thinking about some of the privileges that aren't constitutional rights, like driver's licenses and passports. Yeah, of course, when they're privileges, you are required to do some extra things. But we don't require those things for voting. And when you fill out the census, you can check a box that says, I don't want to answer this. So, Madam Speaker, I don't understand what would be wrong with striking this requirement to ask for someone's race and description. What does that have to do with the competency to utilize a firearm and to get a permit to purchase? I just don't understand how that relates to this bill. Please adopt the amendment.
Further remarks, the member from the 20th District, Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also rising in support of this amendment. You know, I think the gentlelady, gave a really great reason why this amendment makes sense. She said we already have this information on our driver's license. That's our ID. We're not going to be misidentified. We're going to have our ID on us. It doesn't need to be duplicated and put into a firearms database. We shouldn't have databases on who owns firearms, and we certainly shouldn't have all of the descriptions of what our race, what our gender, what our height, our weight. None of that should be going into a database. And if we already have another form of identification, then putting it here is duplicative and unnecessary. And the amendment eliminates that duplication and that lack of necessity. Please adopt the amendment.
Further remarks? The member from the 2nd District, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So what we're asking for is, one, this amendment, or what I'm asking for is this amendment to be adopted. We do not require people to give this information when exercising other constitutional rights. And we shouldn't have to for the Second Amendment rights either. When we exercise freedom of speech, we typically don't require our citizens to get a permit. Occasionally, though, we do. And just a quick search of the enterprise services here in this building, if we want to have an event, these demographic pieces of information are not included in our permit for a free speech event. Also, a quick search, I checked in the city of Seattle, which is one of our most progressive cities in this country, and it's something that Seattle's proud of. They also are not collecting this data for people when they exercise their First Amendment right. I don't think that we should be collecting it for the second either. Thank you.
Representative Walsh, finally I call on you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it. Madam Speaker, I am also asking for a yes on this amendment. And Madam Speaker, I think you can guess where I'm going. Based on what we've heard already, you're seeing the argument for the yes vote on the amendment, which really is a matter of preventing a chilling effect. Frankly, Madam Speaker, it's sort of intimidating if a state agency asks you not just your race and your gender, but wants you to describe yourself to the agency, to the government, into the database. That's intimidating, Madam Speaker. And I think it is designed, I believe, to flex the power of the state, remind the applicant for this permit who's got the power. And Madam Speaker, that is not a good look for the government. That's not a good look for the community. That's not a good look for anything we like in our public policy. Let's not begin to put in place a chilling effect on a person's exercise of their constitutional rights. I don't care what your gender is. I don't care what your race is. If you're here and you're a citizen or a legal resident of this state, you have the right to keep and bear a firearm in defense of yourself and your community. And that goes for black people, that goes for brown people, that goes for men, for women, and all in between. You have a right to defend yourself. It doesn't matter what you look like. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the body is adoption of Amendment 297. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. Amendment number 268, clerk will read.
On page 5, beginning on line 21.
Last line.
Internal references accordingly.
The good member from the 4th District, Representative Schmidt, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move Amendment 268.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 268 be adopted. Representative Schmidt for comments.
Yes. May I have permission to read the effect statement?
Please proceed.
Removes the provision indicating that a signed application for a permit to purchase firearms constitutes a waiver of confidentiality and written request that courts, the health care authority, mental health institutions, and other health care facilities release information relevant to the applicant's eligibility for a permit to purchase firearms to require courts or the Washington State Patrol Firearms Background Check Program. So we've been talking about this application asking for your gender, your eye color, your skin color. This is a universal waiver. If you sign this permit, you are allowing this if it's the Highway Patrol, whoever's doing the permitting process, you're allowing them access to all of your information. And this is for your Second Amendment right. This is your right to be able to have a gun, to own a gun. And you're exposing everything about yourself. Your medical records, your mental health records. And what I fear is that people, when they sign this, when they fill out this permit process, they don't understand that they're signing a waiver that allows, a database that is going to have this kind of in-depth information about a person. Basically, I think the goal here is to ensure safety in firearms. But I think the implications are violate your personal privacy and rights are very, very significant. I ask for a yes on this amendment.
The member from the 35th District, Representative Couture. Representative Couture, would you like to speak? Then please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Rising in support of the amendment, I think this is one of, to me, the scarier provisions in the underlying bill, that you're basically held hostage if you don't give up all your medical information to access your constitutional rights. I mean, where would we do that for any other constitutional right? This provision of the underlying bill that this amendment seeks to remove, I mean, is absolutely essential. If I go to get a permit to purchase and I have to go release all of my very sensitive, personal, medical, mental health information, and then it gets entered into a government database, which, frankly, Madam Speaker, I don't really trust. I mean, we've had breaches in data in our state and other areas before, like ESD. And foreign entities trying to steal our identity and our data as well. Cybersecurity can be good, but it's never perfect. And it's already in too many databases as it is. But in order to access my constitutional rights, I mean, could you imagine, Madam Speaker, where you had to give up your mental health records in order to practice your religion? Or to exercise freedom of speech? That's scary, Madam Speaker. That's scary. And if I have to go get a permit to purchase, and I have to release all my medical records, that's more information that I have to give up to exercise my firearms rights than parents can understand about their kids in schools. Urging a yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 22nd District, Representative Parsley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm standing to urge a no. This fundamentally undermines the effectiveness of the background check. Courts and health facilities provide vital information to complete these background checks. For example, extreme protection orders. Currently, the Washington State Police and other agencies have access to this your records, these records. Underlying bill will just add to these, so no on this amendment.
The remarks. Good member from the 31st District, Representative Penner.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding the constitutional arguments about different rights that we wouldn't typically need to provide this sort of information to access, I'm trying to think about any other activity I might do in daily life where I would have to provide this information to any authority. I'm thinking, Madam Speaker, about driving a vehicle. Vehicle accidents kill more people than any other activity that we do. But I don't need to provide my mental health records to be able to get a driver's license. I'm thinking about taking out a business loan. Madam Speaker, most businesses fail within 5 years. A lot of business owners go bankrupt. They lose their house. They get divorced. You don't need to provide your mental health background to get a business loan. Madam Speaker, there are a lot of activities we do in daily life. I can't think of any of those activities that require the level of information we're talking about here, notwithstanding constitutionally protected rights. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge a yes vote.
Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we mentioned before, this amendment remedies something in the underlying bill, which is a convergence of really two constitutional rights. Of course, your right to keep and bear a firearm in defense of yourself, and also your Article 1, Section 7 right to privacy. And as you well know, Madam Speaker, that the state's right to privacy is more explicit and more clearly stated and stronger, in my opinion, than any federal implication of penumbras of a right to privacy. In our Constitution, it says it straight up, you have a right to privacy, that you can't be disturbed in your person and your affairs. And surely, collecting this kind of information, mental health, physical health, other really personal information, is disturbing you and your person and your affairs. And as others have said, but maybe not put quite a fine point on it, Madam Speaker, what a rich target such a database of information would be to bad actors out there in the world. If we have a centralized registry of information, not only of our race and our gender and our physical description, but our medical records, this would be a ripe target for bad actors and cyber hackers and thieves all around the world. This is the reason why, Madam Speaker, we shouldn't have these registries. And this is the reason why this amendment is essential to protect our constitutional right to privacy. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 268. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. The call for division was made after the gavel. I did not hear any call for division. Further amendments. Amendment number 295. Clerk will read.
On page 5, beginning on line 34, after card, strike all material.
The good member from the 9th District, Representative Schmick, the good member from the 9th District, Representative Schmick, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 295.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 295 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Schmick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This makes an adjustment on the waiting for the background check to move from 60 days to 30 days. And you might ask, why is that important? Well, and I want to mention, I appreciate the times when you've come to my county to visit. My county is 2,159 square miles. On any evening, there is one state patrolman and one sheriff on duty to cover that 2,159 square miles. On the ride-alongs that I've gone along with the state patrol, they're at one end of the county. It can be an hour to respond, and that happened. We were out on Highway 26. There was an accident just outside Palouse. Hour to get there. And why is that important? For safety. If a lady, a woman, has had domestic assault, domestic violence, and she feels the need to be able to purchase a firearm for protection because she's scared, 60 days, it's too long. 30 days is too long. But this shortens that time to allow her to protect herself. And out in rural areas where it'll take a while for the police to get there, I think we need to offer that to that frightened person, whoever it might be. Urge a yes vote.
Further remarks? The good member from the 3rd District, Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We understand that there is contention over this bill. And we believe that the 60 days is what's reasonable in order for there to be sufficient time for these background checks to take place. We want to make sure that we're not rushing things when we're coming up with a solution to address harm that could be caused by not vetting folks coming into our state from out of state. So we're going to go ahead and recommend a no on this. Thank you.
Further remarks? Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, of course, justice delayed is justice denied. This amendment hastens the timeline for completing this vetting of people before they exercise their constitutional right to defend themselves. Madam Speaker, it is eminently reasonable to move this timeline from 60 days to 30 days. As the good gentleman from the 9th mentioned, if someone is trying to arm themselves to be better defended, to be more secure in their, or let me say it, her person, then 30 days is probably too long, but it's better than 60 days. And 30 days would give the bureaucracy time enough to implement the background check, the vetting. Madam Speaker, I can't believe I'm even saying this. The vetting to allow the exercise of an enumerated constitutional right. It is a practical improvement to the underlying policy. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? The member from the 20th District, Representative Orcutt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Also rising in support of this amendment, I sit here and try to remember back to the first day of session. What are we in, day 54? Day 54. We're not even 60 days into this session. Think back how long ago it was we actually started this session. Think about all the work that we've already been able to do in this session. Madam Speaker, take a moment and think about somebody who is frightened. They're in fear for their life. They've got little kids. And they don't know if somebody who's made a threat to them is going to come back. They don't know if they're going to have to defend themselves, protect their children. 60 days. From the start of session, we're not even 60 days in yet. 30 days is an eternity. 60 days is like an entire denial, especially if that person comes back on the 59th day. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of amendment number 295. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Division has been called. The Speaker will open the roll call machine. Has every member voted? Representative Donaghy, Representative Entman, Representative Levitt. Oh, it's a division vote. I guess you don't have to vote. That's right. Has every member wishing to vote voted? The Speaker is about to lock the roll call machine. The Speaker has locked the roll call machine. Will the clerk please take the record?
Madam Speaker, there are 38 yeas, 51 nays, 2 excused.
The amendment is not adopted. Amendment number 289, clerk will read.
On page 7, beginning on line 1,
line.
Internal references accordingly.
Representative Dent to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 289.
It's been moved and seconded that amendment number 289 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Dent.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. A request for permission to read from the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Section 2, subsection 9 of the bill states, The Washington State Patrol Firearms Background Check Program shall develop procedures to verify on an annual basis that persons who have been issued a permit to purchase firearms remain eligible to possess firearms under state and federal law and continue to meet other firearm eligibility requirements. I've been doing a little math here while we haven't been listening to this debate. 42% of the people in the state of Washington own firearms. So roughly 8 million people live here. That's about 3,360,000 people own firearms. Most people don't own just one. Some do, but most people have more than that, and they occasionally buy another one. So let's just say a third of these people elect to have a permit to buy another firearm. Well, that's going to be roughly 1 million people. And we're going to ask our Washington State Patrol Background Check Office to verify on an annual basis that 1 million people are still eligible to own a firearm. Wow, that's going to be an incredible task. We have a hard time having enough state patrol on the highways without filling our offices with enough people to do that. I'm not sure how we could do that. I honestly can't. But it concerns me. And I tell you that down in Yakima County, there's a crime lab down there that's really interesting. If you haven't been there, it's a great place to take a tour. I've been there several times. And they can take shell casings and bullets that are that's been used in crime when they find them in crime scenes, and they can quite often identify the firearm. They can match those shell casings and bullets to the firearm that fired them. But the interesting thing is, I'm talking to the sheriff down there, and I said, well, how does this work? Could you trace back and find these firearms? He says, as a rule, when a firearm is used in a crime, it's gone before we're even at the crime scene. If it's in Yakima, it's probably over on the west side, he said, in hours, which is the statement that they're telling us is, people, they're gone. The firearms are gone. Those firearms aren't traced, and the people that have them don't have a permit to own them. And we're not going to do anything to reduce crime. We're just going to put
You have 20 seconds remaining.
Thank you. We're just going to put a higher level on the people who legitimately own firearms. I urge a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further remarks? The good member from the 36th District, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The recheck process in this permitting bill is a key component of the safety of this policy. As the prime sponsor of the bill, I've spent hours with Washington State Patrol going over how the recheck process would work, and they assure me that they will be able to do this. If you look at the fiscal note, you'll see that they will be staffed properly to undergo these critical rechecks. We must ensure that folks who have prohibiting factors that do not allow them to carry firearms anymore are being checked and rechecked. Without this component of the bill, it undermines the public safety of this bill. Please vote no. Thank you.
Further remarks? The good member from the 2nd District, Representative Barkas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I'm sitting here listening, Madam Speaker, to this as one of the people tasked with writing a very difficult budget, Madam Speaker. The transportation budget appropriates the money for the Washington State Patrol. And you know, Madam Speaker, there was a proposal when we were considering and looking at the backlog of the testing that's needed to process our DUI cases. We were looking at independent agencies, accredited agencies, to be able to do that. Madam Speaker, in talking with the Washington State Patrol, they assured me, and they will, looking at how they're going to be able to do that. Madam Speaker, they're talking about $6 million to be able to do that. Now, this is a different process. I'm sure you know that. But still, it is going to require men and women in the Washington State Patrol to take on this task. And there's going to be a cost to it. So I have to ask, first of all, why, which we've been debating all night. But second of all, I have to ask the cost. Now, Madam Speaker, when I looked at this, and I've been looking at this for a couple hours now, the fiscal is indeterminate in so many different areas, but this piece struck me as one that will be an extreme cost to the taxpayers through the Washington State Patrol to be able to do this. As it says, Madam Speaker, check program must annually verify each person. As you just heard, the numbers are staggering for the amount of people who already hold this. We're going to have to check this to make sure that I, who is one of those people, meets a certain requirement. What is that going to take? How are we going to do that? What is the cost going to be to the people of Washington State? Madam Speaker, this is a good amendment, and I don't think it's necessary for the underlying policy that we're trying to implement tonight to be able to do. So I would encourage adoption of this amendment for a multitude of reasons that I've just described to you.
Further remarks, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the things that we're trying to do here is just ensure that we are preventing firearms from getting into the wrong hands. As we just heard from my seatmate, there has been problems just with implementing the systems that we already have. One of them was passed by Initiative 1639, where we ensured that transfers of firearms happened and were processed by the State Patrol local sheriffs. And we were doing what was termed enhanced background checks. I have a story myself where after this passed, I sold a gun to a friend. We went to our local gun shop, did the transfer legally, reported everything, and they even had a hold that was then lifted once it was cleared by the FBI and local police departments. Well, their firearm was stolen a couple of years later when their entire gun safe was stolen out of their house. And I got a phone call a couple of years ago about my firearm if I knew where it was. They wanted to know where my firearm was because it was used in a crime here in Western Washington. I am fortunate that I have all the records and documentation of that transfer that was done appropriately, and I could demonstrate that to the detective that this was done legally. But it still didn't stop this firearm from being used in a crime. And the database that we have still did not even show that the gun had been transferred. The only database that still had a record on the serial number for that firearm was the ATF one. We don't need to recreate the wheel, and we don't have the resources, Madam Speaker, to be able to effectively do this annually. I urge the adoption of this amendment.
Further remarks, the good member from the 8th District, Representative Connors.
Yes, Madam Speaker. We heard about the budget deficit of the Washington State Patrol being able to do these background checks. What we haven't talked about is the staffing issue at the Washington State Patrol. Permission to read, Madam Speaker?
Please proceed if it's relevant.
It is. Thank you. On May 25th, 2023, the Washington State Patrol, according to Cairo News, is down over 200 positions, and the agency fears it could be short-staffed for years to come. Quoted by one of the Washington State Patrol folks, "We have a hole that is deep, and it's only to get deeper in the next few years." That was 2023. This is 2024. 25. Sorry.
Soon to be 2026 at this rate.
Yes. Touche. There's a little sarcasm going back and forth here, but I'm deeply concerned that we do not have the resources within the Washington State Patrol to continue to do these checks yearly. We have a budget deficit. We don't have more money to give to the Washington State Patrol, and they're short-staffed. So I'm encouraging a yes vote on this amendment.
Further remarks? The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The fiscal concerns here are legitimate, but Madam Speaker, I think the real reason to vote yes on this amendment is that it acknowledges a fallacy of assumption in the underlying bill, which is that increasing the regulatory strictures around law-abiding gun owners with annual checks on their legal status to keep and bear a firearm does nothing about the unlawful criminals who use guns in crimes. It is a constant challenge when we talk about public safety issues. This belief that making the strictures, making the regulations, making the oversight of lawful gun owners will somehow change the actions of people who disregard the law. We're tightening the regulatory strictures on the wrong people here. Now, it is true that this annual update to the database is going to cost the State Patrol more money, I think, than it even estimates now. But the real reason to vote yes on this amendment, Madam Speaker, is it redirects by a few degrees the focus of our public policy away from scrutinizing lawful people and, by contrast, I hope, moving our focus for public safety where it belongs to the criminals who disregard all of the public policy points in the underlying bill. Please vote yes on this amendment.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 289. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. There are further amendments. Amendment number 288, clerk will read.
On page 7, line 18.
Last line.
On page 7, beginning on line 25, strike all of subsection B.
The good member from the 25th District, Representative Jacobson, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move Amendment 288.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment 288 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Jacobson.
Permission to read from the effect statement?
Please proceed.
Thank you. So this amendment removes the authority for the Washington State Patrol to charge permit application fees to cover the costs of the permit to purchase firearms program, as well as fees for permit renewal, late renewal, and fingerprint processing. And the reason, Madam Speaker, that this is important is because we should not be charging for our Second Amendment rights or our rights under our Constitution for Article 1, Section 24 in our Constitution, which even more so gives us the right to keep and bear arms. And so if it is our priority that people take these classes, we should fund them. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Urge a yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 3rd District, Representative Ormsby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning. Rising in opposition to the amendment, we just heard about the fiscal constraints at our state's lead safety agency, the Washington State Patrol, and prohibiting them from even being able to charge to administer. I can tell you one thing I've learned here, Madam Speaker, there's no such thing as free lunch. You can't get something without putting forth the resources in order to get it done. So it severely undermines their ability to administer this program and severely hampers the State Patrol's mission, which is in providing for the safety of the public. Asking for your no vote.
Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think it's a theme that, first of all, I just want to say rising in support of the amendment. It just seems to me that there's a stunning disconnect here. Every time we're proposing a new bill, there's always seems to be another fee attached to it. And this one a little bit more onerous in my opinion because it's attached to a constitutional right. If this bill is so important, Madam Speaker, let's pay for it out of the general fund. But I guess we can't because we're dead broke.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 288. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. Amendment number 287, clerk will read.
On page 8, beginning on line 24.
Last line.
Strike all of subsection 16.
The good member from the 8th District, Representative Barnard, to move the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I move Amendment 287.
It's been moved and seconded that Amendment number 287 be adopted. Remarks, Representative Barnard.
Yeah, this is actually just a really pretty straightforward amendment, just to remove the onerous requirement to report to the state legislature on the numbers and the data every year. So that just puts another burden on top of the Washington State Patrol to take this data that they've collected and then report it to the legislature. And it seems a little creepy to me, just saying, that now what is gone, this data that's gone into this database will now be shared with the legislature. So you've got birthdays, you've got ethnicity, gender, you've got the county that you live in, and I know Garfield County that has 2,000 people in it, or maybe a few more than that. You could pretty much point out with that information who's tried to get a permit for a gun if you're sharing that much information. So I don't see that the legislature needs that. I think it is a trust issue. It's very important for us to establish trust between organizations, institutions, and individuals. Like Washington State Patrol needs to develop a greater amount of trust with individuals, not less. And same goes for the legislature. We have a really tough time with people trusting government as it is. And then we put that kind of information in the hands of government. And, what are the biases that are inherent here in this body of people that are gun owners? I mean, I don't know that because I don't have that bias, but what harassment or what could happen if that information got disseminated? I looked up on the Washington State Patrol website to see what the tasks were that each state trooper had to take on if they became a state trooper. Permission to read?
Please proceed.
So there were 32 duties listed. I'm just going to read one or two of them. A Washington State trooper, the first task would be to conduct active patrol of assigned area and respond to calls for service during day and night to ensure assigned area has patrol coverage 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The next one, observe and identify conditions of vehicles to enforce compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. I'll read the third one, and then there's 30 more where that came from. Use speed measuring devices to estimate speed of vehicles.
You have 15 seconds remaining.
Okay, so just my point being with that, all of those tasks, is that when we're a state with the highest theft in the nation, the second highest property crime in the nation, the third highest card theft in the nation, we cannot.
Further remarks? The good member from the 34th District, Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning to you. The importance of annual reporting to this body cannot be overstated. We've heard a lot this session about the importance of functional programming that we can have good data on in real time to make sure that these programs are up and running the way that we expect them to. And to the ick factor of the reporting, this data will be anonymized and aggregated across the entire program. So hopefully that speaks to the gentlelady of the 8th concern about personally identifying information. I suggest a no vote.
Further remarks, member from the 19th District, Representative McIntyre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning.
I actually agree with the gentleman from the 3rd who spoke on the last amendment. Some very wise words which I think apply here. He said, if I've learned anything, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the fiscal nature that we find ourselves in the state, we can't afford this. It turns out that this portion right here would cost something. If we accept this amendment, it will save our state money. To have a report that's drafted and given to the legislature every year would be very expensive. As we know now, the fiscal note is indeterminate, but you and I can't deny that doing a report annually to the legislature on these things would be burdensome, costly, and because there is no such thing as a free lunch and we need to save money, adopting this amendment would definitely help out with that. So please vote yes.
Further remarks? Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All deference to my good seatmate. My concern is less fiscal and more philosophical here. There is absolutely concern, Madam Speaker, in that this annual report to the legislature would involve, okay, yes, anonymized and aggregated information, but frankly, we've heard that before and seen cybersecurity standards not kept up to snuff. But the real problem here is reporting on the process, including the appeals and resolution of appeals. Madam Speaker, this is a bureaucracy in the making, a bureaucracy designed to restrict the exercise of an enumerated constitutional right. We should not be building a ziggurat of bureaucracy on a foundation of an impaired right. That is a recipe for architectural and legal and constitutional disaster. Please vote yes on the amendment to pull a few bricks out of that wobbly edifice.
Further remarks? Good member from the 13th District, Representative Dent.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, I wasn't going to speak on this until I started to read this amendment. And my goodness, this report that they're going to have to give to us here in this body, to the legislature, is incredible. There's an incredible amount of information in there, and much of that information just shouldn't be out there. We've heard that tonight. This information shouldn't be out there, people's personal information. And they're going to give it to us on an annual basis, those of us in the legislature. And I don't know, I haven't counted the reports we get every year, but we get lots. I don't know about you, Madam Speaker, but I can't seem to hardly wade through all the ones I get now that probably are more interesting to read than this is going to be. And this is some personal information that I don't think needs to be, that we shouldn't even see. So anyway, I'm encouraging a yes vote on this amendment so we can eliminate this bad section of the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Couture.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You heard the philosophical reasons, you heard the budget reasons, and some other reasons I can't remember because it's really early. But just one more practical reason. I mean, we already generate like tons of reports back to the legislature, Madam Speaker, and I've seen this in other functional areas before where we ask someone to give us a report and actually pretty much nobody reads them, and then they stack up 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 reports over a number of years, and then they just kind of sit and collect dust. I mean, that's just a practical concern of mine. It's we keep asking agencies, and it does drive a fiscal note, to generate reports and put in tons of man hours. I think maybe you and I, Madam Speaker, we should at least start reading them.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 287. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. No. The amendment is not adopted. The House will be at ease for a moment. With the consent of the House, further action on House Bill 1163 will be deferred and the bill will retain its place on the second reading calendar. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The Speaker would like to take a moment of personal privilege to wish the Deputy Chief Clerk, Melissa Palmer, a very happy birthday. And on that note, the Speaker would like to inform the body that this is the latest she has stayed up since she turned 60 and that she still's got it. With the consent of the House will now adjourn until 11 a.m. Saturday, March 8th, the 55th legislative day. Hearing no objections, so ordered. The House is adjourned until 11 a.m. Saturday, March 8th.